Well, before I start talking about cardiovascular disease in this series of videos, I just want to say that this is not a substitute for information or advice from your medical doctor. Your medical doctor's advice is very, very, very important, and you want to heed it very closely. And then, if you've got a naturopathic doctor in your back pocket, then you'll have the luxury of being able to have a greater understanding of what's going on with your disease, but also with the medications that you're being prescribed, because some of that stuff can get pretty technical, a little bit complicated, and we can start to get very confused, especially because it's a little scary to look at this stuff. And so as we go through this, I want you to really have compassion with yourself and your loved ones for what they're going through, because this is scary to look at. So let's look at it together. So, if you have cardiovascular disease, there could be a number of different kinds that you have. There might be hardening of the arteries, right? Coronary artery disease, CAD. There might be that you had a heart attack or a transient ischemic attack, which is sort of like a miniature low oxygen state somewhere in the body. Abnormal heart rhythm, arrhythmia. Could be that you need a pacemaker. Heart failure, that's your angina. That's where there's so much fluid around the heart and in the pericardium, the wrapping around the heart, that you have a hard time breathing, and there's certain positions that you can put yourself in that it's harder to breathe. And so you're finding that you're having to sit upright or maybe lean forward a little bit to breathe and things like that. Cardiomyopathy, that's an enlarged heart, typically of the left ventricle, so the lower part of the heart. Aortic disease, that's a different one. Things like Marfan syndrome, things like things that are due to hardening of the arteries. And then there's vascular disease. That's where the stroke comes into play. Vascular disease. And then there's something called Prince-Metal's angina. That's not very common, but if it is something that you've heard of, it's a scary thing to experience, because it's actually it's a spasm in the blood vessel, one of the blood vessels around the heart. So vasospastic angina. And so it can be pretty painful, and it's not necessarily a heart attack, but it can feel like one. So some signs that you're having a heart attack, I have to start here, but bear with me and we'll get into some of the real meat and vegetables of the medications as we go through this series. So, signs of a heart attack. Number one sign of heart attack: denial. So keep an eye on yourself. Make sure that you're not lying to yourself. Make sure that you're not prioritizing what needs to be done over what's going on in your body. It's very important to have body awareness. I talk about this all the time. That's why I talk about the muscles so much. Body awareness. It's very important to be aware of what's going on in our system. It takes skill to do that, and it takes a lot of courage to look at that sometimes. And so if you consider that you might be having a little bit of indigestion, along with a hot flash, along with some chest pain or arm pain, or maybe no pain at all, but you just don't feel right, and you kind of got like a dusky look to your face where it's almost like darkness around the eyes, pale, you're not breathing the same, and you just don't feel like, you just feel like something's just wrong. You might have indigestion. You might be stressed. You might be tired. You might have low blood pressure. You might have high blood pressure. Or you might be having a heart attack. So, chest, arms, neck, jaw, or back pain. Pressure, tightness, pain, squeezing, aching. Body language is important too. So if you're looking at a parent or a loved one, or if you're just sort of monitoring yourself, if you're home alone, and you're like, oh, and your fist goes like this, oh, pay attention. Pay close attention. Nausea could be part of it. Indigestion, heartburn, or what feels like that. Abdominal pain. Could be. Shortness of breath. Absolutely. Cold sweat or sudden change in body temperature. Fatigue. Lightheadedness. Suddenly dizzy. Those are some of the symptoms. You'd kind of hope that it'd be more specific, right? That could encapsulate a lot of things. So that's why we pay close attention to this stuff, and that's why we do education about it. So there's some symptoms of severely high blood pressure, like severely high blood pressure, big headache, fatigue, confusion, vision problems, chest pains, difficulty breathing, irregular heartbeat, or like, right? Blood in the urine could be a sign of very high blood pressure. Pounding in the chest or the neck or in the ears. So what are the symptoms of moderately elevated blood pressure? Sort of like what is blood pressure? Severely high blood pressure, I'm not going to give a number because it's different for everybody and I don't want to throw a number out there. But I will tell you that normal blood pressure typically is 120 over 80. 120 over 80. And that doesn't mean that that's everybody's normal blood pressure. It just means that that's the most normal blood pressure. But what are some symptoms of moderately elevated blood pressure? Not really any. Which is why it's a good idea to have a home blood pressure monitor if you find that you've been diagnosed with blood pressure problems, or if you just suspect some problems. You've been under a lot of stress, you've gained some weight, there's been a lot of alcohol intake in the last 2 years, those types of situations. And you get your blood pressure checked at the pharmacy and it's been high the last 2 or 3 times and you're like, maybe that's a fluke. You know what? I figure the best source of information is just to get curious about it and gather information, and then you know. You're not guessing. You're not lying in bed worrying about it and wondering at night. If you could, and you did, pick up a home blood pressure monitor. I have found them in my career to be quite accurate. I'll have people come in and take their blood pressure monitor with them to their visit, and I'll use my own blood pressure stuff, and I'll do my own blood pressure, and then I'll have them do their blood pressure with the monitor and see if it coincides. And oftentimes it does. Even the really old ones. But if you got a really old one, just make sure it's calibrated properly. Take it into your next doctor's visit, whichever, whether it's a naturopath, nurse practitioner, medical doctor, and ask them if they'll do yours as well as theirs to make sure that yours is still accurate. Okay? So you can check your blood pressure morning, evening, night, right? There's lots of times that we could test and see, well, you know, I don't feel great at 3 p.m. I wonder what my blood pressure tends to be. And you might do a week project of checking your blood pressure every day at 3 p.m. Maybe the next week you check it at 8 p.m. Maybe the next week you check it the first thing you get up. And it's an information gathering. I call it a project. It's a project. I say, go get a notebook that you really enjoy the look of, you know, get a good looking notebook, make it as fun of an experience as you can. Monitoring our vitals is never fun, and for some we can get a little bit obsessed with it where we're just, oh God, I don't feel quite right and I better check, and what if, oh no, and then we're tense. So of course it's going to be a little high or a little low. So it's not for the purpose of going, oh gosh, it's up 3 points. That's fine. Blood pressure is going to go up and down. That's normal, especially if we've been exercising, and especially if we're really wound up about something, such as checking our own blood pressure. So because medical literature states that when we monitor our own blood pressure, sometimes we are susceptible to getting high blood pressure from the act of checking our blood pressure, even at home, right? We know all about white coat syndrome. But the same thing can happen at home if we get a little too attached to those numbers. I always say, throw the bathroom scale out. Don't throw your blood pressure monitor out. Have your blood pressure monitor. It's really helpful. But don't take your blood pressure in a state of fear or discomfort. Take your blood pressure from a state of curiosity and self-love. Yes, self-love. Be like, I am going to learn something about myself today, because if my body has been trying to give me indications that something's up or down, I'm going to get curious about that, and I'm going to look at it. And then I'm going to be able to do something about it if I choose. Just something to think about.